Welcome to Meteor Interviews, a series of interviews with Meteor developers. My name is Paul Dowman. This podcast is produced by OKGrow. We build web and mobile apps for clients using Meteor. You can find us at okgrow.com. Today I'm speaking with Abigail Watson. Abigail has been working in healthcare IT for the past 15 years and is the curator of the Clinical Meteor track, which is a healthcare industry-specific version of Meteor. You probably know Abigail as one of the largest early contributors to the Meteor community with things like Velocity, then Starry Night, and also the Meteor Cookbook. So welcome, Abigail.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Great. My goal is to learn a bit about what Clinical Meteor is.
Sure.
And maybe at some point talk a little bit about Meteor community stuff as well. So you've had a long history in software development, and you said specifically in healthcare IT for most of that. So tell me a bit about your background.
I started, I went to undergraduate at the University of Chicago and did sort of a pre-med there. And then I wound up working at New York Presbyterian Healthcare System. I worked in radiology for 10 years and was involved in DevOps and deploying electronic medical record systems. And while there, I feel compelled to talk about how I found Meteor and became an early developer, because that will frame what Clinical Meteor is and how it all began. So to make a long story short, we were installing Cerner, which is a Oracle-based system. I was in Oracle DBA and all of that. And we were replacing some of the older EMR systems that were based on a programming language called MUMPS, which is based off of the M programming language. This stuff was invented back in the 60s. And document-oriented databases, this MUMPS platform, has been around in the healthcare industry for like 40 years. So we were we were replacing these old systems with modern SQL systems, and everybody was very resistant and didn't like the new systems. Mm-hmm. And that was a big surprise. That was really kind of like, well, what's going on here? And so I started digging into it, and I started researching and learning more about it. And it turns out that two of the largest EMR systems out there in the industry, Epic Systems and the Veterans Administration.
And what's EMR?
EMR, Electronic Medical Record?
Electronic Medical Record. Okay.
Yeah. So Epic Systems and the Veterans Administration, the VA, both use this MUMPS M programming language. Mm-hmm. And it turns out that in the healthcare space, there's a lot of reasons to use a document-oriented database. The data types are matched more correctly, whether it's a doctor dictating the results of a test, or if it's an image, or if it's a graph or whatnot. Most health data is denormalized and it's not tabular. It doesn't fit into spreadsheets and tables. So
is this to fit like legacy systems that already exist, or is it just the nature of the data makes it that way?
It's just the nature of the data.
Okay.
Healthcare data is messy, denormalized. It's nonlinear. It's networks. It's fuzzy. Healthcare data is fuzzy. Okay. So I started looking around for something like MUMPS has its failures. It has its problems, and so
other than the name, you mean?
Yeah, exactly. So I started looking around for sort of a modern version of a document-oriented database, and found Mongo. And at the time, I was using PHP, and we were looking at Mongo PHP systems, and we discovered D3, the graphing library, which is tailor-made for sort of graduate-level statistics, biostatistics, and data visualizations. Mm-hmm. So we found Mongo, we found D3, and it was like, these are the two things for data science, data visualization, if you're interested in bioinformatics. Mm-hmm. If you're interested in healthcare space, bioinformatics, Mongo, D3, you're cooking with gas. It's great stuff. But the PHP was a weak link, and we were like, well, PHP isn't what we want to be using. And then we found Node, and Meteor was the first stack that had Mongo on the database, D3 on the data visualization end, and they connected everything in between with JavaScript. And once that happened, we were like, done, sewed, we found our platform, like this is what we want. And I wasn't the only person who was discovering that. The people up at UC Santa Cruz, people at hospitals were, many different groups were discovering this at the same time. And so at about 3 years ago, around 0.5, 0.6, I started doing some prototyping of, could we make a social health record? Could we do data pipelines? Could we do an ICD-10 data set with Meteor? And time after time, it was like, yep, we can do that. That will work. This will work, and just every prototype that we came up with was kind of like, yeah, this looks like it's going to work out. There were two areas that were weak, though, and that's the HIPAA compliance and the FDA testing story. So we walked away with that from that experience, basically thinking, hey, you know what? This is a viable platform for healthcare applications, but we need to figure out how to make it HIPAA compliant, and we need to figure out how to get the testing in there according to the FDA requirements. Mm-hmm. And so along the way, we started saying, let's create packages and reference apps and so forth. And at the same time that we were trying to make it a little bit more industry specific and prepare these apps for production, Meteor, the Meteor development group was also wanting to expand its base and expand its appeal to people. So the Meteor development group, which has done amazing work, they've been taking a sort of horizontal approach and kind of not an industry specific approach and have been broadening the appeal. And there's been a slight tension there with as they're broadening the appeal, it's making it a little less specific to some of the concerns of any one specific industry. So Clinical Meteor came out of this desire to actually sort of double down on some of the original concepts that were presented in Meteor, and of what we saw as a value proposition of translating everything into JavaScript and getting this kind of end-to-end pipeline where from the database to the data visualization, it was all JavaScript and kind of around this data visualization platform. So so my clients, which include universities and for-profit corporations, a couple open source consortium groups, NIH-funded project, they're all kind of interested in making or having the stack be more vertical and having more packages that are audited to work together so that when they're working on an application, they can just go in and say, oh, we know how the barcode scanner works, and we're just going to drop the barcode scanner in. Or, oh, you know what, we now need HO7 integration. We just want to drop that in. We don't want to reinvent it. And so things like Angular and React are kind of just not on the radar for the healthcare industry. And not that they're not good projects to work on, they're just not the highest priority.
Yep, I understand.
So yeah, go ahead.
So when you say Clinical Meteor is a healthcare industry specific version and you're interested in certain specific aspects, does this mean it's a fork, or is this just you're producing packages that are going to work together?
Yeah, so it's less of a fork and more of a release track. And the Meteor Development Group created a wonderful package management system that has the constraint resolver. And we have atmosphere, and there's some tools hidden in there called the publish release tool, which will take a series of packages and kind of say, and it marks them. It says, at this version, we're going to download it into the client's the package repository, the package cache on the local development machine, and that's going to be sort of like a baseline, those are going to be the default packages that get installed to any individual's machine. So we're looking at using some of the publishing tools to create what's like a distribution, industry-specific distro. In the same way that Ubuntu is a distro of Linux, we're looking at kind of creating not a fork, but a distro within the Meteor ecosystem that, it's like distros or a release track is the best alternative to a fork. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. So does that mean you would be just repackaging the core packages that as they are published by the Meteor Development Group, or would you ever be making changes to them?
Well, so a good example is D3. For the healthcare industry, removing D3 from core was for us it was very impactful. There's a lot of people who were kind of like, well, aren't you overreacting? And this isn't that big, because they don't see, they see D3 as just one of many technologies. It's not all that popular in the broader ecosystem of Meteor users. It may not be the most used package, but within the healthcare space, almost every project I've worked on, if there's a graphing component, it goes to D3. So within our community, removing D3 it made this wonderful data analytics platform all of a sudden no longer have the data visualization component.
So, but what does removing really mean, right? Like if it's published by somebody else on Atmosphere, sure. What's the difference?
Well, and that's a good point. We internally, with some of the groups that I've worked with, had data analytics pipelines. And we, in our data analytic pipelines, we have done a more deeper integration of D3 to the rest of the stack. And so we had API extensions and hooks and so forth. So to somebody who doesn't have that deeper integration, it doesn't matter much. For those of us who are, trying to make reusable graphs, trying to, kind of pull D3 a little bit more towards Meteor, it makes a little bit more difference. And in particular, so in the FDA world, everything has to be tested. And we're interested in creating benchmarks and reference applications. That's one of the goals of Clinical Meteor, is to produce some benchmarks, reference applications. And we saw the to-dos list as the to-dos list is the ultimate benchmark, and it's reused and repurposed and rewritten a zillion different times. And every time that it's rewritten, people look and evaluate, and how does it scale, and how does it perform, and does it have better UI, and and it's used as a lingua franca, or a Rosetta Stone, that people compare. And so we're interested in expanding that. And for instance, we saw the parties demo, the geolocating with D3 MP3 and geolocating as another type of reference app, a benchmark. And so when the parties example was removed from the examples, we were kind of like, well, there went our benchmark that we were programming to, and that we were, kind of referencing things on. So we're looking at bringing some of that back with the Clinical Meteor track and saying, well, maybe less than having a parties demo, we're going to have a whole biostatistics pipeline demo that people can reference, and we'll have the data analytic pipelines. And so when they're re-implementing their application, it'll be there, like we'll have it referenced, and we'll know that if you want to reference, use these versions of these packages, and we're just going to make sure that when you run the Clinical Meteor track, it'll be available by default. So it's some people may have read about the Cathedral versus the Bazaar comments that I've made occasionally. And we see this as moving a little bit back towards the .NET kind of approach, the Cathedral. We're going to audit all of this, make sure it all works together. It's going to be somewhat opinionated, but I just know enough clinicians who are more interested in the clinical aspects than taking a strong stance on any one particular piece of technology. Most of the clients that I work with in the healthcare space, they're more interested in solving cancer than having, and they don't care Blaze, Angular, React,
Right.
Famous, whatever. They really could care less. So we're looking at making something that works for them, and making something that, we're probably going to be sticking with Blaze, and because that's been the most tested and looked at, and we're kind of doubling down on that.
Okay, so that brings up something really interesting. So the Cathedral and the Bazaar, that was an article that was written like 15 years ago, I think, about the Linux development process. And the analogy was some things are built the way a cathedral is, with a very centralized approach. And I think this article was about the Linux kernel being built like the way a Bazaar is BAZ. Just sort of like
everything.
Everybody just like building pieces as they see fit.
It's bottom down versus top down versus bottom up mentalities.
Right. So, ironically, maybe if you're making your own cathedral in the Meteor community, maybe you're making it a little bit more. That is kind of like the Bazaar approach, right? So like everybody doing kind of their own thing, but you're saying within this little part of the Bazaar, we're gonna build like a cathedral.
Yep.
Interesting.
Yeah. So and it speaks to industry specific needs. From the very beginning, Meteor has been very well matched to the healthcare industry, even if not everybody recognizes it or realizes it. The healthcare industry has been using single language, document oriented database application frameworks for 40 years. And there's a lot of reason. There's many people who are looking at Meteor and saying, well, this could be the next 40 years. And for those people who are investing in this area, there's a lot of people who are looking at it at like 5-year, 10-year, 20-year plans, and saying, you know what, this is going to, it's going to change. But the idea of a JavaScript framework running on a document-oriented database, probably Mongo, that's going to stick around for decades, at least in the healthcare space. And so we are looking at this in the idea of, let's start integrating every or not just integrating, but there's all these legacy applications that are currently running in PHP and in ASP and Java and in COBOL and everything else, and we want to make analogs for them in the Meteor stack, and we want to make sure that they're in the namespace that people can find and that they can access, and that they know, well, if I'm writing, a healthcare app or something that's biomedical related, I can go to this namespace and find a lot of what I'm looking for, but also that what I'm looking for has been audited to work together, and there's not going to be a lot of surprises, and that and then after that, if they second guess and they say, hey, there's something bleeding edge with graphing or HO7 or whatever, they'll be able to swap out those packages. But that's kind of down the road,
Okay. So you're talking about making the stack, your version of the Meteor stack, a little bit more of a Cathedral approach, and kind of removing some of the choice, or at least not focusing on it. But Meteor, I think, is opening up. Like Meteor, the core of Meteor is opening up, which seems kind of inevitable, especially based on the fact that MDG's, the Meteor Development Group's business plan is around hosting. So we've got React and Angular being officially supported. We've got potentially Postgres. Even things like the router not coming into the core, causes more choice in the system. So it seems to me that that Meteor, which I feel started a little bit more of a curated, a Cathedral kind of approach. Now I think they've kind of realized that for the widest reach of developers, they need to go the opposite way.
Yeah, it's completely about what markets people are, where they think that their customer base is. Meteor Development Group is casting a wide net, and we, those of us who are working on the Clinical Meteor track, we're interested in healthcare market. So there's really not a conflict unless one tries to take Clinical Meteor and say it should apply to, non-healthcare things. If you wanted to write a banking system with Clinical Meteor, it's just kind of like, well, you're probably using the wrong tool for that job, or so,
right. Or if it happens to work, you're not going to do explicit work to support it.
Yeah, exactly. And so even Windows support, it's not on the top of our list, but HO7 is in DICOM and like radiology viewers are, those are near the top of our list. So we're more interested in making sure that like those packages are all working together. Right. And as we do that, we have to make these kind of tough decisions of, well, which version of the Meteor tool do we base the track off of? And at the current time, we're basically, we haven't moved past 1.0.4. And maybe someday we'll get the Windows support in, but at the same time, we really followed MDG's lead for 2 or 3 years, and every time there was an upgrade and the APIs changed, it was kind of like, well, those applications broke, and now we're, things change, and we really kind of followed their lead for a very long time. And but there's also an interest in taking some of these applications and these prototypes public or into production now. So the other side is, well, we're going to start being a little bit more conservative in not being so bleeding edge, but we want to take some of this stuff and get it into production, and that means pegging an older version and saying we're not going to upgrade until everything's tested, until it's really kind of been out there in the wild and tested and reviewed, and we have all of our ducks in a row.
Well, that makes sense given the specific needs of healthcare. I mean, it is aside from compliance and everything, there's a reason for that. You have to. I think bugs in your apps are a lot less tolerable than in some other types of industries.
So that's just the nature of our particular industry. And we're not saying that everybody has to use it, but we're excited when people do use it. And but it is a different sub-community, and we have our particular needs.
Yep.
And the beauty of open source is that we have the tools and the code, and we're able to say, hey, you know what, we're going to make a healthcare distro. And instead of whining and saying, oh, y'all are doing it right, we're just going to say, hey, you know what, we're going to do it in this particular space how we need it to be done.
Right. I really like that idea, because I think, Meteor opening up is good for a lot of people. They get to choose the thing that they want. But for a package author, and I'm already feeling this myself with the stuff that we produce at OK Grow, like we're rewriting things to work with Flow Router.
Yep.
Maybe like everything that we do, a lot of things are tied to Blaze, tied to Mongo. And so now if you want to produce a package that's going to work for everybody, that just doesn't make sense anymore.
Yeah.
So, but then that kind of begs the question eventually, like, why even have Atmosphere at all, right? So
it's an interesting question. That always struck me as they had people who knew how to build that, and they're on the core team, and so that's what product they're shipping.
And it has. I mean, there are some reasons, right? Like, for client side code, you have a single version of all the libraries, as opposed to like npm pulling in potentially many different versions of things like underscore or anything else. Being able to package both client and server code. But if you get to the point where you're building like a React front end app with a Meteor back end, and you're just mixing and matching everything, I just wonder that whether you might want to just start pulling if the world of React packages exists on npm, then that's where you're going to end up going.
I agree, and these are questions that to be perfectly honest, I understand that that's where the community is going. From the point of creating these healthcare apps, it's really just a lot of us aren't interested. Like we just have other concerns, and it's just kind of like that is not on our top 10 list.
No, you're trying to get something specific done, and and you're also in a very conservative. You're in a very conservative industry, and you're probably far on the bleeding edge of it already, I would imagine.
Yes, we are already so far on the bleeding edge, and it's not that we don't appreciate what the conversation is occurring. It's just like there are so many other things that are more pressing that we just have to pick the things that you're working on, and. So best of luck to all the people who are working on those problems, and we look forward in 4 or 5 years time to see the what happens with all that, and we'll do a big upgrade down the road. In the meantime, we're looking at taking the stack much more vertical, and that's going to require another round of people saying opinionated. Well, we got it to work together. And now you can, reap the benefits of that cathedral-like approach, and get closer to working on your cancer problems or your multiple sclerosis problems or diabetes or whatever, and not be worrying about things like server languages and client languages. Yeah.
And database. You can publish a package and not have a problem like. One of the things that's holding back Postgres support or SQL language support is the fact that the user accounts package, packages which are totally core to Meteor, are actually tied to Mongo.
I logged a ticket on that years ago, literally.
So I love the idea of being able to just produce packages for one environment and know that they're going to be able to work, and also conversely, being able to go to some repository, hopefully it's Atmosphere, and be able to pull something into your app and know that it's going to work.
I I am curious to see if Atmosphere is going to wind up having like local installations. As a hospital, would we be able to get an installation of Atmosphere local to our healthcare network for secured package distribution? The move away from GitHub hosting, with GitHub, you used to be able to have Git Labs, and you could host a private repository, and that's something, and I am quite sure that there's healthcare organizations that would be happy to spend money on that kind of product, but I do hope that product will exist.
But don't you also want to be able to pull things from the rest of the world as well?
Sure. Yes, on both. With the package management system that they've introduced, we do have some questions about how does all that work? How is that going to work in the future?
Interesting. So do you think maybe like the answer to the problem is MDG continues to open up and, pave the cow paths, so to speak, where at the same time, people that want to just focus on something can either not make a fork, but do kind of what you're doing with a release, like sort of a curated vertical stack.
I totally see the curated vertical, I wouldn't be surprised if there were many of them in the future. In the same way that Linux has all Ubuntu and Debian and all the different distros, I think Meteor is ripe for that.
They do all have their own package repositories too.
And yes, and I do think that part of that happening is having some way of, if people are going to use Meteor as an ecosystem of packages, there needs to be a way of basically giving people an ability to there's going to be security-minded people. There's going to be special interest groups, and they're going to want to host their own package repositories. So that's kind of the big question of this approach. You have to sometimes take risks, and that's one of them that we're currently taking, is that we're going to be able to figure that problem out in the future.
Cool. Very interesting. Well, I love the idea of competition occurring at every level. I also, though, I don't want to work with things that support every possible option. I want to have some forking competition, but I also want to choose a side and just go with it. So
when NPM integration was first added back in 0.65, I was actually one of the vocal people saying, think this through. Be careful about this, because NPM has 100,000 packages, and half the time I use NPM, I'm just wading through packages that don't work with each other. And the signal to noise ratio is not all that great with NPM. So that's the downside of the Bazaar approach, is you get flexibility and choice, but sometimes choice can lead to paralysis, and it can lead to, too many choices.
Yep. Totally. Okay. Well, I think that's been an interesting conversation about what you guys are doing, and I think that sounds like a good place to leave it.
Okay, great. Thank you for interviewing, and I guess that gets the word out with what we're doing. And clinical.meteor.com and starrynight.meteor.com. We didn't get to touch on that quite as much, but feel free to check them out. And
Awesome, thanks. And if anybody wants to get in touch with you personally, where's the best place to do that?
On the Meteor forums, awatson1978, also awatson1978 at gmail.com, at GitHub, that's my GitHub handle, Skype, and a couple others.
And a very full GitHub repo it is, or account, full of many repos.
There's lots of packages. It's my day job.
Awesome. Okay. Well, thanks a lot, Abigail. It's great talking to you.
It was great.
Thanks for listening. If you liked this show, you can subscribe using iTunes or your favorite podcast app. For more info, visit meteorinterviews.com. To learn more about OK Grow and the work we do, you can find us at okgrow.com.